We're going to have a video shortly, and then after the video, Archbishop Bolen will come online to greet us here, and there can be an exchange between the three panel members. Archbishop Bolen is the Archbishop of Regina in Canada, and has been a member of the Dicastery for Christian Unity for a number of years, having the desk concerning Methodists and Anglicans and the Week of Prayer. He is also the co-chair of the Methodist Catholic Dialogue. He had great influence and learned a lot from working with Geoffrey, and I'm sure he'll tell us some of his experiences, which will accompany those that we've heard recently. So we'll have the video, and then Monsignor Bolen will come online.
Warm greetings to all of you who are gathered for this celebration of the life and work of Geoffrey Wainwright. It is a privilege to offer a few words of tribute. When I was first interviewed about the prospect of working at the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity in 2001, to work at the Anglican and Methodist desk, serving those dialogues and relations, I shared that I knew something about Anglicans from my years of doctoral research on Archic, but that I really didn't know much at all about Methodists. Cardinal Cassidy, who was one of those interviewing me, said to me, "You're going to love the Methodists." I learned in a hurry that I loved working with Geoffrey Wainwright. The first project we were involved with was the Methodist Association with the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, signed by the Catholic Church and the Lutheran World Federation. Geoffrey knew that the Joint Declaration was the highest level of reception of Western dialogues with the Catholic Church, and he knew that when he read the JDDJ, and he read the differentiated consensus between Lutherans and Catholics recorded in that document, that as it outlined common statements of faith and unique emphases from Lutherans and Catholics, he knew that Methodists could sign on to that as long as they were permitted to identify their own emphases. Geoffrey took a leading role in a meeting in the fall of 2001 in Columbus, Ohio, and really moved forward the process. He entered into dialogue with people in the World Methodist Council, with the Catholic Church and the Lutherans involved, with the Reformed tradition also involved. Geoffrey really orchestrated the process by which, 5 years later, in 2006, the World Methodist Council was able to associate itself to be a signatory to the Joint Declaration. It was an indication of the kind of ecumenical work that Geoffrey Wainwright did. It will be for others to talk about Geoffrey's significant contribution to the Lima document on baptism, Eucharist, and ministry, where he played a key role. My work with Geoffrey was principally in the context of the Methodist Catholic International Dialogue, what we call MERCIC. And Geoffrey was the co-chair during the entire period that I was privileged to work at the Vatican, and his leadership as a systematic theologian really drove that dialogue. He identified the topics, one theme after another, that Methodists and Catholics needed to address in order to grow more closely together. Geoffrey's Catholic counterpart was Bishop Michael Putney from Australia, and when I first came on board in that dialogue, Michael told me, "We have the privilege of working with a great ecumenist, with a giant." Geoffrey truly was an ecumenical giant, a great ecumenist. What makes an ecumenist great? First, I think, knowing your own tradition and loving it while owning its struggles and shortcomings, not trying to hide them. Geoffrey knew Methodism inside and out and loved it. An openness to the other, to the dialogue partner, an ability to listen deeply, to learn about the other, and to learn to love the work of the Holy Spirit in the dialogue partner. Geoffrey knew the Catholic Church, and he knew it very well. The Catholic Church could be very well represented in any presentation that Geoffrey Wainwright gave about it. Next, to enter into dialogue, this great, holy, and life-giving task entrusted to the members of bilateral dialogue commissions, to foster a space for honest, rigorous dialogue in pursuit of the truth, in faithfulness to the gospel. The MERCIC dialogues under the leadership of Geoffrey Wainwright and Michael Putney were a theological banquet. They were deeply enjoyable encounters where we were able to share honestly and robustly from our faith perspectives, from the richness of our traditions, where we were able to identify commonalities and differences, where we identified convergences, especially those that were unexpected. We celebrated them. Geoffrey and Michael's leadership created a space where we, as a dialogue commission, working together, wanted to identify as much as possible, to chart out as much as possible what Methodists and Catholics hold together, where the consensus points were, where the places of convergence were, where the differences were, and identify how we could work on those differences and advance in our relations. Geoffrey and Michael worked together to create a wonderful atmosphere in the Dialogue Commission. They cultivated friendship, and Geoffrey, in particular, mentored others in the work of the dialogue. He and Michael were able to draw out the gifts of each commission member. We understood, under Geoffrey and Michael's leadership, that we were entrusted with a task that was dear to the Holy Spirit, a task entrusted to us by the crucified and risen Lord, who desires so deeply that his disciples be one. So they created the most conducive possible atmosphere for us to advance on the steps towards full visible unity. The result of all of that was that the Methodist Catholic International Dialogue was something of an overachiever in dialogues. We continued to exceed the expectations of the sponsoring churches with the convergence and consensus we were able to register. For Geoffrey, a good dialogue report was not enough. That wasn't the end point. As a great ecumenist, he wanted to see what the dialogues and the dialogue documents we produced were bringing to birth, the work of reception. Geoffrey wanted our churches to live into the opportunities which our dialogue created. One project that Geoffrey and I both were deeply committed to was the preparation of a document which would summarize the 4 decades of dialogue's work which had taken place already. In February of 2010, Geoffrey attended a conference sponsored by the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity about the reception of dialogues between the Catholic Church and partners, ecumenical partners in the West. At that meeting, Geoffrey articulated the value and need of documents which would lead to the reception of key elements of the bilateral statements. I quote, "I wish to propose that all parties should find ways of formally and officially enacting the results so far of each of the dialogues in which they are engaged." This example was characteristic of Geoffrey's concern not only with mapping out theological agreement, but also with the process of reception. On one occasion, Geoffrey went to the Pope, I believe it was Pope Benedict, and made the proposal that he could bring together the heads of churches in the West and the East in order to address crises, in order to address current needs in the world. He felt that all of the ecumenical dialogues that had taken place to that point over the course of 40 to 50 years after the Second Vatican Council justified us in taking bold steps together, and that there was a new space for the heads of churches to be speaking together. He wanted us to do that because we could. He wanted the church, all of our churches, to live up to their lofty calling and to let the Holy Spirit to lead us in integrity and truth, to take whatever steps were possible as a result of the faith we held in common. Geoffrey was deeply committed to the Lund principle of the Faith and Order Commission of the World Council of Churches, that we should do together all things except where deep differences require that we act separately. He understood that that would take courage and creativity, and he put himself at the service of that task and goal with great energy. All of that, and his own faithfulness, his own personality, his own deep commitment, made Geoffrey Wainwright a great ecumenist. It was a privilege and a joy to work with him, to be taught by him, to experience his friendship. We honor his legacy by committing ourselves to our dialogues and working hard towards their reception so that our churches can truly be transformed by this fine work. I'd like to conclude with offering a prayer from John Wesley that Geoffrey himself shared with me. The prayer goes like this: I come, Lord, I believe, Lord. I throw myself upon thy grace and mercy. Do not refuse me. I have not whither else to go. Here will I stay, I will not stir from thy door. On thee will I trust and rest and venture myself. On thee I lay my hope for pardon, for life, for salvation. If I perish on thy shoulder. If I sink in thy vessel. If I die at thy door. Geoffrey Wainwright died at the Lord's door. Our lives have been enriched by him. Our churches have been enriched by him. May he rise in glory to see the face of the risen Lord that he loved and served so well. And may we, as churches, as theologians, as ecumenists, as disciples, carry forward the legacy that Geoffrey Wainwright, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, has left us.
Bishop Bolen is online. I don't know if you would like to add anything, personal further reflection after hearing the reflections of the other panel members, and they might have some last exchanges to make as well.
Maybe just one little story. When Geoffrey came to Rome, when Pope John Paul II died, I was able to host him at that time, and other ecumenical partners were there, and Bert Beach was there on behalf of the Adventists, and I was out for a walk with Geoffrey and Bert, and then Geoffrey mentioned to Bert, yes, Don's our Methodist man at the Vatican. And Bert nodded, and then a little while later, over supper, Bert said to Geoffrey, how did you Methodists get somebody hired at the Vatican? So anyway, Geoffrey knew how our systems worked and how he could foster and promote dialogue, and I think used every means he could to foster steps towards unity.
Do you have any last comments, either Bernard or?
Maybe just two things. There are several people here who know Geoffrey Wainwright better than I do. So I don't know, but we are talking about Methodists, Catholics, Lutherans, and so on, but we haven't talked about Orthodox. And for him, Orthodox theology was very fruitful, and he felt very, very close to it, I think. Alexander Schmemann was a great figure for him. I just want to say this as a footnote to complete the picture. Orthodox theology is maybe also and also in some way Anglicanism was, he found it very interesting, no? Orthodox theology also key to understand his classic view of historic Christianity. There we see where he was. And then I just want to close my part by saying I am amazed, especially now being rector of a little university and getting to know many theologians and students and so on, how much can fit into one life of scholarship, being really, really well read in biblical studies, dogmatic theology, liturgical studies, and ecumenical theology, writing a fair amount of books and articles, and then being involved in texts in ecumenical contexts, which takes a lot of time, and then traveling constantly. So I'm just amazed how one person can do so much. And I finish by saying maybe one clue to that is really discipline. I remember that at Duke University, when he was at Duke, he was there from I don't know when, in the morning until in the evening, and this 6 days a week, also Saturday, which fits maybe to what he once said to me. You know, it's strange, and I don't dare to say it loud, but I don't like nature. I like museums and books. So he was a very disciplined man who really did much with his life, and that's what I'm amazed.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about Geoffrey is his wide experience as a church person, because he was a pastor in a congregation in England, he was a mission partner in the Cameroon, and also a theologian. So he had experience of this wide range of church activity that I think was helpful and made him a very rounded person in that sense. But yes, I do remember this. He was not particularly interested in rambles through forests and parks. That was Margaret's area, because Margaret, his wife, was really very into nature and natural history and bird watching and all that kind of thing, but not Geoffrey. And the rocks should be carved into beautiful statues, not sitting picturesquely in a meadow or anything like that. So yes, I resonate with that bit.
There's one question, comment online.
Is from Anja Müller from Berlin. Thank you so much for these touching personal retro perspectives. As a Catholic theology student in the 90s and now as a Methodist pastor in Germany, I've come full circle. Even more after just having spent 3 weeks in Ireland and having come back with very nice contacts to the Dublin congregation and many photos. Thank you very, very much. Anja Müller, Berlin.
I wonder if I might add a comment. Yes, I'd like to add one comment about a talent of Geoffrey that I haven't heard mentioned so far. We've mentioned his gift for languages. He also had an ear for accents, or certainly accents from the United Kingdom. Let me begin by the reverse. When I was visiting professor at Notre Dame, I used to walk around the lake and got to know somebody, a lay person, got in conversation, and he said he had a talent for telling where people came from. And he said, listening to me very carefully, said, I know you're not from around here. Quite right, I'm not from South Bend, Indiana. He said, don't tell me, I'm going to guess. It's east of here. And I thought, okay, yep, we're going to get to the UK. And he said, I've got it, it's Boston. Well, no, he was wrong. The very opposite of that was Geoffrey. Most people can tell that I'm from southern England, but probably other than that, it's a sort of a generic accent. I actually come from Essex. Geoffrey, before even knowing, told people Brian Spinks comes from northeast Essex. He could tell, he could hear my accent underneath my accent. And then he told me, and I hope I can remember the story reasonably accurately, we've heard of his love of cricket. He was at a cricket match and sat next to an Anglican bishop who was brought up in Yorkshire, though I think was of Asian descent. And in the conversation, Geoffrey said, telling from his Yorkshire English accent, he said, I think you grew up in such and such a place. And the bishop replied, you're 3 villages out. That's how accurate he was at listening to English accents. And that was a great talent.